What you see here behind you is this is really your customer. At the end of the day, if you're talking about chronic conditions, absolutely you have, type 1 patients with diabetes, pediatrics, and that sort of thing. But if you look at the broad spectrum of patients that are driving the preponderance of healthcare costs, it's an older population. A word about Healthy Interactions, we were founded 12 years ago with one single-minded purpose, and that was to improve the lives of people with diabetes. And then we've expanded into 20 other chronic conditions. And that's everything that we've done over the past 12 years. And we've had 35 million patients go through our programs. There's been 58 as of Friday, I guess, clinical studies, totally independent. We didn't pay for them, validating the efficacy of our program. So we believe we have some interesting insights around how to change behaviors with this very important population. The quote you see up there, we completely agree with. You start with the consumer experience and then you work backwards. You don't start with the technology from our perspective and then try and apply it. And let me go to the next slide, but before I do that, I want to ask the audience one question. How many car companies were there launched in the first 20 years of the US auto industry? Anybody? 500. Anybody else? How many? 25. Can I have the next slide, please? Or is there a clicker?
1,500?
Over 1,500. And you'd be stunned how many were electric car companies. That blew me away. And obviously today there's about 3. As Carleen mentioned, the iPhone was launched 10 years ago. And so really we're in the first 10 years of the digital health world, right? And yet there's well over 100,000 apps that are related to healthcare. I heard recently it was 165,000. I don't know who counts them, but it's a big number.
It's over 160.
Yeah, it's huge. Who will win? We don't know. But not everyone will, and I think a lot of them will end up like the original car companies did. And a lot of the money, very, very sadly, I'm sure we'll all agree, very sadly, that a lot of the money that the venture funds put into these companies may not generate a return for them, but that's too bad. Let's go to the next slide, please. So is it a bust, or are we in this evolutionary period? One thing we do know, we haven't cracked the code on what the human API is. So it can't just be a pure digital solution, in our opinion. What we've done is something that integrates in-person, which is reimbursable still, with digital technologies, and we'll show you how that works. Can we go to the next slide, please? Oh, is there a clicker, or? Okay, all right. The next slide, what we're going to do is we're going to look at who these people are, what the population is. So again, this is the audience, the primary audience, the big bolus under the bell curve. So this is data that's taken from Pew, the National Council on Aging, CDC, and the American Diabetes Association. First at the top is 100 million people. That's how many people they estimate have diabetes or prediabetes. So every one person has diabetes, you have 3 people that have prediabetes. Once a person goes from prediabetes to diabetes, their annual cost goes up at least $6,000, and if they have cardiovascular disease and if they're out of control, their costs are $40,000 or $50,000 a year. You guys understand that numbers. This population, this kind of middle-aged and senior population, 92% have at least one chronic condition. 77% have 2 chronic conditions or more, and they generate 75% of all healthcare costs. Jordan this morning used the number of 84%. Whether it's 75 or 84 out of 3 trillion, it's enormous, which is why there's 100,000 or 160,000 apps out there. The right-hand side, the green data, Pew Research in May published a study that said for the senior population, 42% have smartphones. And that is dependent upon education levels and such, but in aggregate, today, 42%, that is obviously going up. Our data, what we've seen is when we're working with patients who have smartphones that are the senior population, at least 50% of them think it's a phone. It's not a smartphone to this population, generally speaking. And that's an important distinction. Just because they have a smartphone doesn't mean they understand or are comfortable with all its usage. And again, from the Pew study, they said that 74% of seniors want personalized in-person onboarding of smartphone technologies, and 73% say we're very uncomfortable and not confident in using it. So that's the population that you have to try and crack the code in. So I asked the question, can you have a pure digital solution with those characteristics with those people? It's unclear to me. Our model, we do things a little differently. We'll talk about that. Can I go to the next slide, please? So we've observed is it? Oh yeah. We've observed 5 challenges to the pure digital model as it relates to patients with chronic conditions. And again, we're talking about the older population that drives most of the cost. Those 5 things are, number 1, there's a big disconnect between healthcare culture and consumer-based digital use. Think of healthcare culture for a second. Look at this population of people or us in the room. We've grown up for decades and decades and decades interacting with the healthcare system in a very passive way. We go see a smart person. I go see Dr. Jim. He fixes me, right? It's passive relationship. I'm not taking active ownership. I'm not managing my health. I have to change the relationship I have with my health. That's happening, but in large numbers, based on what we've seen, it's not the majority of the people. Consumer digital is much more active. I take a picture, I post something, I sell something, I buy something. It's very different. So that's one major disconnect between the reality of a healthcare culture versus the aspirations that were promised through a digital culture. Number 2, demographics. We just talked about that. The older population have some systemic challenges as it relates to behavior change and the use of technologies. Over 100,000 apps. It's very confusing, very cluttered space. What to use, how to use it, so on and so forth. Economics. We all heard that CMS recently said, no, we're not going to reimburse for digital DPP yet. That'll happen. It's got to happen, but it isn't there yet. And so now you're faced with the reality that most digital technologies as it relates to chronic conditions are not reimbursable, right? And so yes, self-insured employers, different conversation. And then at the same time, they haven't really shown great impact. And again, I'm talking in aggregate. There are absolutely some examples where things have been successful, but in aggregate, that drives down cost on a pure digital approach in a sustained way. So it's a very challenging economic model for this. And so unless you have a good, robust balance sheet, that's a pretty difficult sales cycle, right? But still, this is what we're facing. So what did we do? What is our model? I'm going to show you 2 more slides, one on what our model is and one on the impact, and then we can talk about some other things. So next slide, please. So our model, there's 3 major components to our model. Hopefully. There. Okay. So if you look on the left first, you see kind of a funnel. It's supposed to be a funnel. CDS stands for Clinical Decision Support. So we have a clinical decision support platform that seamlessly integrates into Cerner or Epic and whatever. And then we have all sorts of evidence-based rules that help the physician find the patients more effectively and efficiently diagnose them. But not just, hey, Paul's got diabetes, his A1C is above 7. No, Paul's been on 2 or 3 orals for the past 4 years. His A1C is still above 9. He needs to transition to an injectable regime. So literally identifying patients at these important points of transition of care, which is really critical. So that's helping find patients. But in terms of engaging patients, and this is what we're talking about more right now, it's what's in the box in the middle. At the bottom, you see an image that looks like what you guys are doing, except you don't have a big map in front of you on the table. Those are conversation map tools. That's where we launched the enterprise 12 years ago, doing these tools that are deployed in 127 countries and 39 languages and cultures, are used every minute of every day around 20 different chronic diseases. They work, no question. And they qualify for reimbursement, which is a very important distinction. What we did then was we built a digital technology platform, or digital engagement platform, which is the imagery on the top. That platform is designed to connect patients with healthcare professionals through the EHR, curated content, goal setting, all the biometrics tracking is all captured Bluetooth through there. It was designed to complement the in-person program, but it's not dependent upon it, so it can stand alone. But here's the beautiful part. When patients are together in the in-person program, which is hosted by a licensed healthcare professional, they are onboarded with the digital tools. So you remember what we talked about. Pew said that these people, 74% or 73%, want to be onboarded and taught how to use digital tools in person. That's when we do it. And it's reimbursed. And so we have protocols. These conversation map sessions, there's multiple sessions. So we have protocols on how to use the digital technology during the sessions and in between the sessions and post-graduation. We have about a 70% completion rate. And so this kind of integrated in-person and digital model today for the bolus of consumers or health consumers that are driving healthcare costs around chronic conditions, that older population, this model works.